The good thing about a technical fix is that we know what we're doing. We know what we're going to do before we do it. There's a technique to it. There's a whole method there. And that makes things very, very straightforward. Whenever there's a technology, everything always happens in this predetermined way. So we could say that is the good thing, because it certainly is less demanding and less challenging. So then the question is, when we're dealing with a non-technical approach, what do we do? How do we do that? How do we do a thing that's non-technical? And that's actually a stupid question, because if someone could answer and say what we do when we're doing something non-technical, that in itself would be technical. So it's at this point that things do become more challenging. Before I go into that, I'd just like to say one more thing that I forgot to say last time when I was talking about the technical approach to mental health. I wouldn't want to imply that the technical approach never works or never has an effect. The question is more subtle than that. If I as a therapist or I as a client target a particular behavior or a particular neurosis, a particular way of thinking, and I target that with whatever technical approach that seems to work the best, then it is possible to get rid of that neurosis, that neurotic behavior. It's possible to diminish it severely, so it's no longer taking up so much of my energy and time. That is possible. And so when we apply the technical approach to a specific behavior or a specific pattern of thinking and there is a result, we could quite legitimately, well, not entirely legitimately, say it works. But we can only say that in a very, if we take a very circumscribed view of things. And the problem here is a kind of a principle which we don't hear talked about that much, which we could call the whack-a-mole principle. And the whack-a-mole principle is very easy to understand, of course. A mole pops out. The basic idea is a mole pops out. If it's whole, it's mole hole. And you've got a big hammer. When the mole pops out, it shows its nose, you whack it with the mallet as hard as you possibly can. Really go for it. Just whack that mole. Give it a damn good whack. That's the beauty of it. It's all kind of pretty intuitive. And then that's the mole gone, because you whacked him on the head with a giant mallet. But the game, of course, is because as soon as you do that, another mole pops up somewhere else and you have to whack him. And before you know it, you've gone full whack-a-mole. You really got into the whack-a-mole. The thing about the whack-a-mole is, even though it's kind of could be fun in a way as a game, you aren't ever going to win, obviously, because every time you win, you lose. Every time you crush the mole in one place, eradicate the mole in one place, he appears in the other. So although there is this satisfaction of hitting the mole and whacking him and getting rid of him, that satisfaction, the problem is, even though we can have that satisfaction of getting somewhere, that satisfaction of succeeding, that satisfaction of achieving our goals, you can get that, and it's like, yeah, that's a good feeling. But the problem is, we can get that good feeling, but only at the price of it not being real. It's not a real solution. It's an infinite regress. if we see an infinite regress to be an infinite regress, we see that it's not a success. We see that it's not a meaningful thing. So we don't see the infinite regress in all of its glory. We just take a very, very small thing, very, very small picture of, here is the mole, I'm whacking him, he's gone. Now, as long as we keep to that, we'll think, yes, I did it. So that's what we do in mental health. If we took a bigger picture and kind of looked at things for a while, we'd realize a problem can be passed around the place. It can be displaced onto other things. And that there is an awareness of this sort of thing in psychiatry. I think that some people use the terms cycling. Cycling meaning that you can get over, for example, your depression, and you go into a state which isn't depressed, but it's part of a cycle, and eventually you come back to the depression again. So we could say in cycling, if we look at things in terms of cycling instead of whacking moles, if we take a small enough view of the circle or the cycle, so we don't actually see it as a circle, we just see me being depressed, something happening, and then maybe taking medication, and then I'm not depressed. We just see that, and it's like, yeah, that's what I want to see. That's the fix. That's the technical fix. So in that kind of provisional sense, there is such a thing as technical fixing, and that's why we can so easily get hooked on it. When we look at the bigger picture, using the example of this cycling phenomenon, and we see that it's a circle, it's a cycling phenomenon, then there isn't that feeling of, yes, I've done it, because we've done nothing. We're actually seeing a circle is a regress, a circle is an infinite regress. We aren't new in trying to change behaviors. Human beings have been thinking about this for a long, long, long time. And where human beings have thought most about this is in the fields of self-development or spirituality. And this has been something that people have been thinking about for tens of thousands of years. I don't know how far it's documented. It's certainly documented 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 years BC. I don't actually know. No doubt it could be further back than that. But the point I'm trying to make is this is not unknown territory. And one thing that has been said and is pointed out is that we've got all these things that we would like to change or we'd like to work on. If we were in this business of self-development or the spiritual path, or call it whatever you want to call it. It's hard for me to say the term spiritual path without automatically feeling cynical. But there is such a, I suppose there is such a thing, but it's an abused kind of phrase, really. Anyway, so what has been pointed out is that supposing I have a particular type of a thing that I'm working on, it could be laziness, it could be greed, it could be it could be vanity or self-love. But supposing it's anger, just to make this simple. Suppose I've got a problem with anger. Suppose I've got a bit of a rage issue. I want to work on that rage issue because rage isn't good. Now, if I apply all the stuff, all the meditation, all the contemplation, whatever it is I'm doing, and I really focus and really, really be mindful about that anger, I can minimize it, I can get rid of it, I can cause it to be much, much less. But what has been found, generally speaking, is, and I could quote Ram Dass on this if I could remember the quote, is that when that goes, something else pops up. So, for example, if I get rid of my rage, my anger, I'm no longer angry, but then all of a sudden I could be proud. Naturally, I could be proud because I've been thinking, yeah, I licked that. I've whacked that particular mole on the head. And then I feel proud. And so the thing is that pride is every bit as much of an obstacle as anger or all the rest of it. So what we can do very easily, applying so-called spiritual technologies, is that we can cycle. You can cycle around all these things, all the different things that I want to work on. I can just go from one to another. And then after a while, I'll come back to where I started. So that isn't any good, clearly. I'm just stuck in a regression. I'm getting nowhere. So we can say, okay, the reason for that is that there's no technological approach, no focused and specific technical approach that could work in this business of personal transformation. That's not working. And the reason it doesn't work, we can say what the reason is why it doesn't work. Because behind all of this strategizing and behind all of this application of technology, there is a controller, there is an ego. And so no matter what that ego does, no matter what limited success it might have in a small field, it's always that same ego wanting the success, driving it, having the intention, the goal to do that. So we're not getting rid of the ego which wants to improve the ego, the self-improvement ego. That's a particularly obnoxious ego to get caught up in. So anything we do on purpose always has an associated ego which kind of is invested in getting the purposeful behavior to pay off in the sense that we can realize our purpose. All controlling always has a controller. How can they be controlling without a controller? Controlling doesn't happen by itself, after all. So what we're saying is controlling is no good. In this sense, I don't mean controlling across the board in this sense of therapy. So one reason we could give for that is that when I controlling equals resistance. When I control, I create an ego, a controlling ego. And that's the problem I'm stuck with. Doesn't matter what I'm trying to control. That might be a bad thing and I have to control it. Okay. But the price of this is that I create a controlling ego. And that's bad shit. Because what am I going to do with that bloody controlling ego? What can I do with that? Get another ego to control it. To knock the corners off it, put it in its place. Fine. And I can say, yes, I've succeeded in modifying and putting that ego back in its box a bit, so it's not such a pain. But then I've got the meta controller, the controller of the ego, the new controlling ego. Controlling is never going to work because controlling is a circle. But if I'm not controlling, what the hell can I do? What the hell do I do? Controlling. When I'm controlling, I'm always fixated on the possibility of getting it right, which is a possibility of euphoria, feeling good. That euphoria always belongs to the ego. Nothing else feels euphoria apart from the ego. And I'm also focused on getting it wrong because I'm afraid of getting it wrong, because instead of euphoria, I get dysphoria, the mirror image of euphoria. It's like if you do a line of cocaine and it's like really strong cocaine, like 90% Peruvian flake, like really whatever type of, really, then you get this euphoria. So just flip it on its head, and that's what dysphoria is. It's like that, but the reverse. It's like, it's not good. So only the ego feels dysphoria, just like only the ego feels euphoria. The ego actually is half euphoria, half dysphoria. It's a spinning wheel, one after the other. That's what it is. And the ego is a controller because it always has to control in order to exist. And when it controls successfully, it feels good. And when it doesn't, when it fails to do that, it feels bad. That's the story of the ego. So something else has to be done if we are to create a space between ourselves and that controlling ego, something that isn't controlling. And then our first thought naturally is, okay, tell me about that. What do I do? What do I do to create the space? To create a bit of space between me and that ego so I don't think it's me the whole time. And of course, as soon as we've done that, that's we're looking for a way of controlling. We're looking for a way to create another ego. So there is no way to create that type of space, not on purpose. Because if it was done on purpose, it would be an ego doing it, and that means there's no space. So just to illustrate a little bit more how that circle always pops up. The other thing we can do, though, instead of having a technology, is noticing what's going on, being aware of all of this, and being aware of ourselves trying to solve the problem by controlling it but making it work. So being aware of all of that. So if I am playing whack-a-mole, I'm aware that I'm playing whack-a-mole. I don't kid myself that I'm doing some kind of linear thing where I got a goal and I attain the goal and then I get euphoric and it's brilliant. That's the ego's game. I realize that doesn't mean that's just an infinite regress. It never gets anywhere. It's just a spinning wheel or a coin that keeps flipping over and over. Now, to see that is not an easy thing to see. It's hard. It's tough to see it. It's a hard thing to see. So this is the art of it, really. The art of it is not doing things with the hope of making things better, but rather it's seeing ourselves doing stuff with the hope of making it better. So it's not that I stop what I'm doing, but I stop buying into that naive view of things, that if I do one more thing, it'll be fixed, it'll be better. Just go over one more hill and I'll be there. And then there's another hill and I say, I just go over one more hill and it'll be there. So seeing the hard thing is to see that that is exactly what I'm doing. I'm in an infinite regress and I'm not allowing myself to see it. So then I stop constricting my view. I actually step back a little bit and I allow myself to see that. That's a hard thing to do. Seeing futility, that's kind of like conscious frustration. I'm being frustrated the whole time and I'm doing stuff that's totally futile the whole time, and instead of kidding myself it's non-futile, I allow myself to see the actual absolute futility of it, the absolute futility of trying to change your own mental state, or of the ego trying to change itself, to pull itself up by its shoelaces, to better itself, improve itself, make a better ego of itself, not a crappy old ego but a decent ego, responsible ego, spiritual ego that has empathy and meditates and shit like that. So I see all of that. I see the mess that I'm in, and I see the self-deception. Now, because that is a hard thing to see, the whole point is that it's a hard thing to see. And it's not like I'm saying if I do this, then everything will be great, which creates an ego, because the ego is hanging in there waiting for the great thing to happen, which never does. It's the story of the ego in a nutshell. Well, it's the story of the self-concept, how the nucleus of this thought-creating nucleus of who I think I am. So if we don't pin everything on it'll all work out further down the line if we keep doing the right things. If I see the futility, that means I'm not hanging out for the good thing to happen, which means I'm not crystallizing an ego, I'm not creating an ego. So whenever there is, because that is psychological work. Psychological work isn't to do with goals. It's more to do with seeing the futility of all goal seeking when that's applied to mental health or self-transformation. They call self-transformation. So to see a hard thing with no help, with no hope of getting anywhere with it, to see one's own life, to see one's own activities and behaviors and endeavors in that way, causes something to happen which you could call disidentification. We stop identifying with whatever various egos. Because doing something that is hard, seeing something that is hard, looking at something that is hard, there's no comfort in it for us. There's no reassurance, no sense of security. There's no pat on the back, no validation. Is what creates a distance between the ego that I have identified with and my sense of myself. So if whenever we're exerting ourselves in that way, and this isn't goal-orientated exertion, it's being in a difficult place, that's what creates the space, because it's not crystallizing an ego, it's not creating an ego. So I'm not actually doing a thing, because doing a thing means that I have an idea of what I'm doing, and it means that I have an aim, what I'm trying to do. That means I'm fixated on a goal, which means I'm fixated on an illusion, which I refuse to admit to be an illusion. So that's the same old thing. It's got nothing to do with goals. It's got nothing to do with doing. So as Krishnamurti says, the seeing is the doing. We love doing because when we're doing, we don't have to see. Doing is the anesthetic. Keep busy, keep busy, keep busy. Keep believing. It's going to work out, it's going to work out, it's going to work out. Or we could flip over into the opposite. It's never going to work out. It's the despair, the dysphoria orientated. All of that is just ego games. So to see what I'm doing and to see the futility of it, to see that the nature of the whack-a-mole game and to see the nature of the infinite regress, it's a really, really hard thing to do. I don't mean that you just have to see that 24/7 all the time, but you'll get a glimpse of it every now and again and be able to hang out in that glimpse a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And what happens is that we develop a new way of looking at things that isn't a selfish way. So I don't mean selfish as in you're a nasty, selfish person because you won't give me any of your goodies. I mean selfish as in self-orientated. You start looking at things in a kind of a global way or an ecological way or a way that isn't based on this one concept of the self. We start seeing things via consciousness, not via the mind. So we've separated consciousness from the mind. And the difference is consciousness is interested in things for what they are without any ulterior motive. It's just interested. Whereas the mind is only interested in terms of what it can get out of it, what the goal would be, what the payoff is going to be. Always having an agenda. So to be in this space, which is Keats's negative capability, to be in this space without grasping after conclusions, without trying to realize some agenda, is in essence what the art of suffering is. Okay, thanks for watching.